Alright folks, so this is going to be the first in-car video, just starting it up in the morning, on my way to work, and just going to give you a little bit of rundown on the car. Looks like we need fuel, which is a typical attribute of this car. So anyone who is looking to buy this car that thinks they're going to get good fuel economy, you're not going to get good fuel economy, ever. No matter how you drive it, where you drive it, forget about it. It's not going to ever happen. So, like I said, it's one of those things about this car that you really, really have to accept and commit to. It's noisy, it's loud, the resonance from the motor does create a lot of interior rattles and buzzes and noises that you normally wouldn't get in an AMG or a BMW M4 or anything else like that. I mean, in a Porsche, you do get a lot of resonance just by the firing order and the way those engines are. Not the newer turbo motors, but I'm going back to the older, like the first generation, 991s, 997s, and all of that. When you start them up in the morning, they shake the crap out of the car. But other than that, I mean, ergonomically, this car is pretty basic, and that's really another thing that I like about it. There's no funny joysticks. There's no touch pads. It's just a basic driving setup. You got your gauges front and rear. You got all your controls on the steering wheel for your suspension, and you have your exhaust mode, launch control, traction, and all of that good stuff. But for the most part, you don't need much more in this car. You don't need to be playing Apple CarPlay and watching movies, and no, this is not that car. I mean, they specifically didn't design this car for anybody that wants to cruise around and lounge and drive slow, and no, it's not that type of a car. And like I said, there's a couple other things that I love about this car, and I think the biggest improvement that I feel for my body type are the new Recaro seats. Now, the Recaro seats in the 2015 are the same Recaros that were used in the GT500s, the older generations. And they were first introduced, I believe, in 2011 or 2010 with the GT500 and the Boss 302 models. But, everybody thought it was a great seat at the time. But after you sit in the new seats, which are really designed after the Recaro Sportster CS and the Audi R8 style seat. That's just the shape of the seat, the bolstering, the profile. And the reason I like the new seat better is because the earlier version of the Recaro seat in the Mustangs, the bolsters were too big. They were too big and stiff, and the backrest is angled so far forward that you're constantly lurching your body forward. And if you're in the car all day long, all that's doing to you is giving you chronic upper shoulder pain, neck pain, and no matter what you did to the seat, you just can never ever get that seat super comfortable. Now, these seats in the GT350, I could be in the car for 4 or 5 hours. I have zero complaints, zero fatigue. I don't have any issues getting in and out of the car, and I also have several upper and lower spinal injuries. So I have, a couple of herniated discs. I have cervical and lower lumbar pinched nerves. And in this car, I don't have a problem with the seats. I love the seats. There is no lumbar support, but the shape of the seat, the ergonomic of the seat, they just did their homework, and it just works. Steering wheel, flat bottom GT350 steering wheel. A lot of guys are putting these on the S550 cars. I mean, it's a really affordable upgrade. And like I said, it just feels good in the hands. It's not too thick. It's not too small. I mean, I think it just feels right for this car. I mean, if it was to be any bigger, any smaller, it probably wouldn't feel right. The shifter, like I said, I prefer the style of the GT350 shift knob better than the ball knob. The reason for that is I have, some injuries in my hand, from a motorcycle accident back in the days, and I had surgery on my thumb joint and my wrist. So with the ball knob, if you're constantly in and out of traffic all day long, I was getting a lot of tendonitis and a lot of pain in my joints. So with this knob, you're able to hold it, grasp it like this, and the transmission is light years ahead of the MT82. The MT82, a lot of people complain about it. It is a crappy transmission in a lot of respects. I mean, I tried all the aftermarket shifters and a couple of little mods to that, And once I switched out the fluid in the MT82 and I switched out the knob, I was happy with it. I had 30,000 miles on my car over the course of 3 years, and I got used to it. I loved it. I mean, this shifter is much more precise. You're less prone to grinding second and third gear, which is very common in the MT82. And other than that, it just feels more like a performance car. So I'm going to turn off the screen somehow if I figure this out. And we're going to shoot some video. Screen's off. Okay. Let's just head down the road. And I had the car in normal mode. And to be honest with you, there's only 3 suspension settings. You have normal, sport, and track. And to be honest with you, a lot of the roughness in the ride is coming from the tires in this car. The Michelin Pilot Super Sports, it's a rough riding tire. It's an amazing handling tire. It's great in the rain. It gives the car its dynamic feedback. And that's really what this car was designed for. It wasn't designed to ride like a Cadillac CTS-V. Which also uses Pilot Super Sports, but just with a different, that's a totally different car altogether. But like I said, we're on a very bumpy road, and if the seats weren't so compliant, it would actually get on your nerves. But like over the weekend, I was driving on some really, really tough roads where there was, constant expansion joints every, couple of feet. And, doing that for 15 or 20 minutes, the car is rough. It's going to beat you up. And that's just the nature of this car. And it's one of those things where a lot of guys are driving their Shelbys as a weekend car. They're taking them out just on occasion to go to shows. Some guys are taking them to a track. I mean, I'm driving this thing every day. So I don't know how many people out there are driving the GT350s every day, but I'm doing it. I bought the car not to sit in the garage. I have other cars that sit in the garage that are classics. So I don't know, that's just my money, and like I said, it's a car. It's meant to be used. It's not meant to be covered up in the garage. I mean, is the car going to be worth money one day? Yeah, most likely it will be. Like I said, there's always going to be a demand for a Shelby GT350, and considering that this is a full-blown performance car, this isn't just a Mustang with a trim package like the way most car companies build a performance model. They'll just slap an aero kit and some wheels and a couple of badges, and they'll say, oh, it's the performance variant. No, this car, if you got the engineering DVD and you got the engineering book on this car and you know what this car is all about, I'm going to be honest with you, I was blown away. I didn't know that they took the time to shave weight off the axles and off the control arms and the way the springs are wound and the calibration of the shocks and the dual mass flywheel and the dual disc clutch. I mean, and it's funny, like, if anybody's worked on cars and understands, the clutch and flywheel assembly in this car is pretty much identical to what you're going to find in a BMW M car and in a Porsche. When you look at the components, it's like, it's like the same componentry in there. So, Ford was smart where they took apart some of the greatest driving cars. I mean, they took apart a 458 Ferrari Italia just to take a look at the engine design, and that's where they came up with the flat plane crank. And I think it's kind of cool that they went to Ferrari because, if some of you guys don't know, the Ferrari-Ford rivalry that stems all the way back to the 1960s, which led to the development of the GT40 and Le Mans and everything else. But if you don't know the history of that, go do your search online. So it's kind of cool that they bought a Ferrari 458, they ripped it apart, they took the motor apart, and they saw how the Italians, because Ferrari builds some of the best motors still to this day in the world. I don't care what anybody says. Like I said, and then what they did, they took attributes of the Ferrari motor, and they put the, Detroit engineering behind it, and made the American hot rod version of it. And like I said, look, we're on a really, really bad road here, and you might see the camera jitter a little bit, but to be honest with you, I mean, these roads down here are really, really bad. But you can hear there's no rattles in the car right now. The car's fairly compliant. I'm just on the way into the office, so it's not the hardest car to drive, not at all. Another thing to mention is a lot of guys are complaining about the clutch pedal, and they're changing the clutch spring, and there's no clutch feel, whatever. You guys are nuts, because this car has a dual disc clutch. Now, I have a lot of dual disc clutches in a couple of my other cars, and like I use like the McLeod RXTs and RST clutches, And it's just the feel of a dual disc versus a conventional single disc. It's very different. So in this car, you have to understand that it's going to feel different. It's going to catch different, and you just have to get used to it. So I already came into this car already accustomed to that type of feel. So I never really had an issue adjusting to it. I did do the clutch spring on my GT Performance Pack, my 2015, because that car, I just had a very hard time getting smooth engagement, especially in stop-and-go traffic in New York. No matter what I did, that car was always jerky. You know, some guys removed the assist spring, some guys changed the weight of the spring, some guys changed the clutch line, some guys changed the clutch and flywheel altogether to a dual disc just to get that better clutch feel. But in this car, I don't feel that there's an issue with clutch feel. Like around town, this car is very easy to drive comfortably. It's very easy to drive in stop-and-go traffic. But like I said, stop-and-go traffic in New York, it sucks. So I don't care what car you're in. You could be in an automatic. It just sucks. So the thing is, the road quality, you know, around here it's pretty bad. And you'll see, like I said, I just want to show, as this the first startup and drive to the office video, how the car feels. And you can get an idea, like it's totally livable. It's not one of those cars where, like if I had a Corvette, like a new C7, like I was looking to buy a Grand Sport, and I was looking to buy a Z06, and after I drove those cars on these roads and the roads that I am driving on daily, I said there's no way I would ever want to drive that car as a daily driver. Too low to the ground, too bumpy, too uncomfortable, there's no storage space, and just everything about the car just didn't really make sense for my lifestyle. And I think this car fits my lifestyle, because I could fold the seats down, I could throw boxes and stuff, you know, I could go to the Home Depot. Yeah, I do take the car to Home Depot and Lowe's. It's not a big deal. I'm not a baby like that. But you know, and like I said, it's just a very versatile car. It has a dual personality. You could drive this car locally, and then if you have to go see a client or go somewhere north where the roads are nicer, you could drive this thing, you know, all out, and it transforms from a comfortable sports car to a full-blown, obnoxious racer type car, you know. And that's what's cool about this car. I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, you can hit a couple of buttons and try to change the feel of the car with the exhaust, the steering, the shocks. But other than that, the platform is so damn good, and there's so much grip. And the grip in this car is probably the most important aspect of why it's so good. And you have to look at some of the componentry of the car. I mean, the car has 19 by 10.5 wheels in the front. Now, it's also riding on 295 aspect ratio tires. I mean, like a 295 in the front of a car, that's unheard of. I mean, Ferrari's not doing that. Porsche's not really doing that. So they put such a large contact patch on the front of this car, and the reason they did that was for the grip and the balance, because of the rear IRS, the power that this thing produces, the wheelbase, all of that stuff. It was pretty much designed hand in hand, so they needed the front grip. And when you're pushing this car, and you know, especially when you're going through some sharp turns at high speed, that front grip is like the best part of this car as far as, you know, the handling attributes. You know, the brakes are incredible. They're absolutely incredible. I mean, they stop just as good as any Ferrari and Porsche that I've driven with carbon ceramics. And I kid you not. I mean, the modulation, the pedal feedback, the ABS integration, everything about it is just, they're phenomenal. So they did their homework on that. And the rotors on the car are what I call like a dual compound. They have a cast iron rotor with an aluminum hat, and they're kind of put together through like a casting process. So if anyone has owned a Cadillac CTS-V, that was one of the first performance cars that I owned, the version 2, that had that same rotor technology. And a lot of people were complaining that the rotors were clicking and, you know, this and that. But, you know, think about it. You know, aluminum and cast iron have completely different heating and expansion and contraction rates. So that's where a lot of that noise comes from. So the Band-Aid solution that General Motors came up with to solve the noise was, you need to torque your wheels down to like 158 foot-pounds, and that was pretty insane. But you know, even on this car, you know, I torqued the wheels down to I don't know, whatever was in the specification, I used my snap-on wrench and I went like 10 foot-pounds above that, just to make sure everything was, you know, well within spec. Now, another thing I noticed on this car, and a lot of people have complained about, is some clunking in the front suspension. Now, I didn't know what the hell it was. It actually sounded like it was a blown strut, and I took the time to put the car up in the rack the other day, and I'm looking at it that the front shocks don't have rubber external bump stops. There is no rubber external bump stop on the front shocks on this car. The piston in the front shock is like 1.5 inches thick, whereas a conventional shock is about the size of your index finger. So I'm looking at it, and something that I did notice, I don't know if it's just, you know, my car or a batch of cars, was the bolts that are underneath the hood for the strut mounts and the strut bar. All of the ones on my car had to be torqued down a little bit more. I don't know why, but they just did. So I torqued them down, I re-torqued all the wheels, and so far I don't hear that noise anymore. That was really annoying me. So that's a really good thing. So if anybody out there has that noise, you know, just go under the hood, you know, grab a really good torque wrench, whether it's a 3/8 or a 1/2 inch drive, but, you know, get a really good torque wrench and don't overdo it. And just go over all those bolts. You need a 15mm socket, and, you know, make sure they're all tight, because I noticed on my car that there was a lot of a lot of differences between all the bolts with the torque settings, and, you know, that very easily could have caused, you know, that clunking noise if there was any kind of movement in the upper strut mount. So, like I said, I'm just driving in town right now. You know, the back lot of the office is kind of jammed up, so I can't really find a spot right now, but I'm just driving around, talking to you guys. Just want to give you guys some more driving feedback, daily driving feedback in New York, because like I said, a lot of guys do videos all over YouTube, and they're doing them on canyon roads in California or down in Florida where there are no potholes, and, you know, it's not a realistic review. I mean, a lot of guys that own these cars are in the Northeast, they're in the Midwest, and, you know, there aren't many realistic daily driving reviews of some of these cars, especially the cars that I want to buy. So, like I said, this is going to be one of those cars that I'm going to do. You know, I'm going to do a bunch of videos, a bunch of testing on it, and like I said, I hope some guys out there like the content and appreciate the feedback that I'm going to give you, because if you're considering this car, you know, there's a lot of things you really need to know about it. There's a lot of things you need to accept about it. And it's one of those cars where you really shouldn't have higher expectations of what you want out of this car. I mean, if you want it to ride like a Lexus LS, it's not going to ever ride like a Lexus LS. If you want it to have the luxurious interior of like an Aston Martin or a Porsche, you're not going to get that, because you have to look at the price point where this car is. The car is between $60,000 and $70,000, and yeah, granted, some of you guys may have bought the car for $85,000 or whatever because of the markup, but you know, if you're going to look at a comparable Porsche GT3, you're at like $170,000. So, I mean, put that into perspective as far as what you're going to get for the money. Now, you could buy a BMW M3 and an M4, and those cars are in the $80,000, $85,000, sometimes $90,000 area, and you're going to get just a bi-turbo inline six. The steering in the M cars, in my opinion, sucks. I hate those cars. BMW hasn't made a good driving car in a long time, in my opinion. Everything is too computerized, and everything is too synthetic, and it just doesn't feel the way it should feel. So, and that's another reason why I love this car. It has 295s on the front, and the steering system is so quick and so dynamic. Now, if you were to put 295s on any other car that wasn't designed appropriately, that extra contact patch is going to make the steering feel vague. It's going to feel slow. It's going to feel sluggish. But Ford did their thing on this car. I don't know how they did it, but they did their thing. That you could have really fast, really sharp, dynamic steering with tenacious grip, and without having to put a 245 in the front of the car. Like, you know, a lot of Ferraris have 245s or 255s. You know, they go with a smaller tire, and if any of you guys ever drove any of the newer Ferraris, one of the things that I love about those cars is the steering response. It is lightning quick, super direct, has incredible feedback, and that's just Ferrari. That's their thing. And Porsche over the years has kind of gone in a different direction with their EPS systems. And some cars, they feel great, some cars are not so great. And I just think the Germans just overthink everything. With everything that they do, they overcomplicate it. They need to just stick to simplicity and what works. Stick with a good ZF rack and call it a day. You don't need to complicate matters. And I think when you start complicating cars, you're taking away a lot of the driver feedback. And that's why this GT350 is so awesome, is that this is a driver's car. This is not a car that has all of these driver's aids built in. It's going to save your ass. I mean, that's what's cool about this car. This is made for the guy that wants to drive the car, not for someone that wants the car to drive him, like a Tesla. Not into those cars. Sorry. But like I said, I hope you guys like the feedback. This is just going to be a quick intro video. And like I said, just driving around town, it is bumpy. It does ride hard, but the seats really make up for that. The seats are very comfortable. They're very forgiving. And like I said, if you do have like spinal injuries or any sort of health conditions where you may not feel up to driving a car like this every day, totally understandable. I mean, you have to be in the mood mentally and physically to want to be in this car every day. You want to deal with the noise. You want to deal with the bumps. You want to deal with the rattles. And you also want to deal with going to the gas station almost every day, like I do. No matter what I do, I could drive this car. I could short shift it at 3,000 in every gear, and I will still get between 7 and 9 miles per gallon. No shitting you. So, it's just the way it is. I mean, the only other car that I owned that was this bad on fuel was my 2009 BMW M5. But now, taking into consideration, that was I believe it was a 5-liter motor, but it was a V10, and it had 10 individual throttle bodies. This is a 5.2, normally aspirated, with just one big throttle body. So, the compression on the Voodoo motor, it's like 12.5 to 1, I believe. I read something like that. So it's a high compression motor. It's high strung. The motor loves to be revved out. So around town, when you're below $4,000, you really have to feather the throttle and really know how to drive it. Otherwise, the car's going to chug. But if you get into the throttle, anything above $4,000 to the 8250 or wherever you want to bring the red line up, it's like in its sweet spot. It's very similar to the way a Ferrari is. When a Ferrari hits $4,000 all the way up to the 9,000 red line, I mean, that's where those motors are designed from. And I think that has a lot to do with the architecture of a flat plane crank, normally aspirated motor.